שבחי ירושלים את אדוני, הללי אלוהי ציון. שבחי ירושלים את אדוני, הללי אלוהי ציון. כי חיזק בריחי שערייך, כי חיזק בריחי שערייך, ברך בנייך בקרבך, ברך בנייך בקרבך, ברך בנייך בקרבך. הללי הללי אלוהי ציון, הללי הללי אלוהי ציון. שבחי ירושלים את אדוני, הללי אלוהי ציון. שבחי ירושלים את אדוני, הללי אלוהי ציון. כי חיזק בריחי שערייך, כי חיזק בריחי שערייך, ברך בנייך בקרבך, ברך בנייך בקרבך, ברך בנייך בקרבך. הללי הללי אלוהי ציון, הללי הללי אלוהי ציון.
אשת חיל נמצא רחוק מפנינים מיכה, פתח בלבלה ושלל לא יחסר. מלאכו טוב ולא רע כל ימי חייך, תעשה מרופשתי ותעש לחפץ כבדה. הייתה קורניו סוחר ממרחק תביא לחמה, ותקום בעוד לילה, ותיתן טרף לביתה וחוק מנערותיה, שמים השדה ותיקחהו, מפרי כפיה נתת כרם, חגרה בעוז מותניה, ותאמץ זרועותיה. כמה תיטול שכר, לא יכבה בלילה נר ידיה, שילך ותישוב, וכפיה תמכו הלב. כפה פרסה לעני, וידיה שילך ללוי, מחזירה לבית המשערי, ככל בית הלבושני. מרבדים עשתה לה, 6 וארגמן לבושה, נודע בשערים בעלה, בשבטו עם זקני ארץ, סדין עשתה ותמכור, וחגור נתנה לכנעני, עוז והדר לבושה, ותשחק ליום אחרון. פיה פתחה בחוכמה, ותורה חסד על לשון, סופיה הליכות ביתה, ולחם עצלות לא תאכל. קם פניה וישרוה, בעלה ויהלל הרבות בנות עשו חיי, והטלית על כולנו, שקר החטא להבל היופי, אישה יראת השם, התפללתנו לה, מפרי ידיה, והללוה, בשערים מעשיה.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to this week's World Alliance of Qara'im Shabbat Torah study. I am Hakham Melech Rahmiel Ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, and we have, as always, what I hope will be a very interesting, fascinating, and engaging Torah study. So everything is good here. Just a little update for those of you who have been following along for the past couple of weeks. You know that I found an almost dead little kitty cat underneath the wheel of my car about 2.5 weeks ago, and she was literally on the verge of death. If she had not squealed as I backed up my car, then she would have been dead within probably a couple of hours. She was extremely dehydrated. She wasn't even moving. I thought she was dead or about to die, and now it's 2.5 weeks later. She's lying down. I don't want to bother her, right next to me on this chair next to me, and she's doing great. She's eating ravenously. Her new hobby is eating. She's gaining weight, although she's still very skinny. When I rub my hand across her body, I can still feel I forgot how to say in English the word, her spine, the different knobs of her spine, and also her rib cage. But she's definitely gaining weight. She's doing very well, and she is just a beautiful cat. She's got this long hair with all these different colors, and she's just a very, very, very beautiful little kitten. She's still very small, but she seems to be doing very well. So that's the update with that. And so other than that, it definitely continues to be interesting here in the city where I live in the Golan Heights. So people are definitely in an uproar that there's a Karaite that lives among them. The rumors that are being spread, the complete lies that are made up out of absolutely, very little or very distorted, actual facts or completely fabricated is unbelievable. It never ceases to amaze me how people develop kind of, mob mentality or witch hunts or this kind of thing. But, as I always tell people, this ain't my first rodeo. I've been through this many times before. I've been doing this Karaite thing for 30 years, and they got to do what they got to do, and I got to do what I got to do. So the show goes on, of course. And at any rate, so what was I going to say specifically? I don't know. I don't really have that much to say on that front, except to say that it is amazing. I think there's a famous. You guys have seen the movie The Matrix. Let's see if I can bring up this exact quote. Line from The Matrix. I'm just typing it in here. No, we don't. After a certain age. So Morpheus, if you remember the character Morpheus, I'm sure you've all seen the movie. I've seen the movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all times, and over the years, I've probably seen it. Probably, I'm not exaggerating, 50 times. And I'm not a big movie watcher. I don't really watch a lot of movies. But The Matrix, I felt was such a watershed kind of movie. It just really captured the essence of what was going on in people's minds back then and to this day. And of course, the whole idea of being caught in the Matrix is a meme. It's an idea that's entered into culture, into a Western culture, so much so that even if people have never actually seen the movie, then they still understand the concept of being caught in the Matrix. So here's the exact quote. So there's a quote from Morpheus to Neo, and he says, "We have a rule. We never free a mind once it's reached a certain age. It's dangerous. The mind has trouble letting go. So that's what I could say about dealing with the rabbinical Jews that I've had to deal with here in the city that I live in. They are clearly caught in the matrix of rabbinical Judaism. They're caught in a cult, and many of them are older people. They're, in their, let's say, 40s, 50s, even 60s, and they just do not have the ability at that age to think or to perceive anything outside of the box. And so, if you attempt to free people from the matrix who are not ready to be freed from the matrix, then they see it not as an attempt to help them, but an attempt to hurt them. They see it as a threat. And I can't think of any better analogy than the matrix analogy. The people who are caught in the realm, in the cult of rabbinical Judaism, their minds, it seems, with some very rare exceptions, are not in a position to be freed from the cult that they're caught in, from the matrix that they are caught in. So much more to say about that, but I do want to focus on other things today. So I think we'll do that. But if you understand that the rabbinical Judaism, and it's not only that, it's more than that. Rabbinical Jews realize at this point in time that it's only a matter of time. It's a ticking time bomb. That rabbinical Judaism is on its way out. If we look at the trend over the past couple of hundred years, it's gone from approximately 100% of all Jews who were Orthodox, who were rabbinical Jews, to now 10% at best. Of course, the rest of, or many other people who are Jewish will do certain things. They'll give their kids bar mitzvahs. They'll maybe separate meat and milk. Not even that many people. They may do a couple of things here and there, but they're not by any way, shape, or form, or in any way, shape, or form adherents to rabbinical Judaism. So I think the few remaining holdouts, the few stubborn holdouts, we learned not long ago, Leviticus chapter 26, and I'll read the exact quote again. Just give me a second to bring it up here. So in Leviticus chapter 26, it's the chapter of the blessing and the curse, and one of my favorite lines from that is, let me just bring it up. I'll just read the English. So part of the curse is if you don't obey the Torah, then all these horrible things will happen to you, including death and exile. Then it says in Leviticus chapter 26:40, but if they, meaning the remnant of the people of Israel, because all the rest have been killed off because of their sins against Yahweh killed them off. So there's only a remnant. So if they, and they're living in the lands of their enemies, they're scattered among the earth, as we know has happened. But if they will confess their sins and the sins of their ancestors, their unfaithfulness and their hostility towards me, which made me hostile towards them, so that I sent them into the land of their enemies, then when their uncircumcised hearts are humbled and they pay for their sin, I will remember my covenant with Jacob and my covenant with Isaac and my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land and ingather them. We are now in the process of ingathering. There are approximately 8 million Jews living now in Israel. It's the largest Jewish population, concentration of Jews in the entire world. Number two being, of course, the United States of America with about 6 million Jews. But for the first time, I think it was about 10 years ago, the Jewish population of Israel superseded the Jewish population of any other country in the world. So we're definitely in the process of this ingathering of the exiles. And part of the ingathering of the exiles is us, again, to quote verse 40, confessing our sins, the sins of our ancestors, our unfaithfulness and our hostility towards Yahweh, and returning to Yahweh. And most of the nation has, as I always say, I've said this now a number of times over the past couple of weeks, but I'll say it again. In my eyes, the datim are the chilonim, and the chilonim are the datim. And what do I mean by that? Those who are datim means religious, chilonim mean non-religious, and actually the datim, the ones who think they're religious or who are Orthodox Jews, are actually not religious at all. They're not keeping the Torah. They're keeping something else. some bizarre, deviant, derivative religion of Torah. And then you have your typical Israeli who maybe on Shabbat is going to sit in a big cafe, in a coffee shop, and with his friends and eat and drink some coffee. They're actually, in a certain sense, not in a certain sense, they're actually keeping the Shabbat better than the Orthodox Jew. The Orthodox Jew who today, let's see, my friend told me, he was reminding me of some of the halachot, of some of the laws of Orthodox Judaism on Shabbat. Thank God I forgot most of them, but I remember learning them in detail. So he said that according to, or when he was in a certain community, they would not open a bottle of soda because it was considered making a kli, making a vessel. So making a vessel is one of the 39 forbidden activities that the rabbis say you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. And if you open a soda bottle, then you're making a vessel. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbat. So what would they do? They would take a knife and puncture the cap of the soda, of the Coca-Cola bottle, the plastic cap. They'd puncture it. And so then when they unscrewed it, they were not making a vessel because they had already destroyed it. It already was not. It already had abandoned being a vessel once the cap was punctured. I mean, this is the kind of nonsense. This is the kind of insanity. This is the kind of stupidity that the people of Israel, who are supposed to be the wisest nation in the world, this is the level that they've descended to. This disgrace, this travesty, this embarrassment to Torah, and this embarrassment to Yahweh, the creator of heaven and earth. This is the level we've descended. But thank God, these are just the stubborn holdouts. These are not keepers of Torah. These are keepers of some derivative cult, some derivative religion, some bizarre cult named Rabbinical Judaism, and their numbers are dwindling. They're trying to perpetuate two lies to stave off the inevitable. Number one lie is that a lot of people are chozrim b'tshuva, are becoming Orthodox Jews, are finding their way back home. Chozrim b'tshuva literally means returning in repentance. So that's a lie. And in fact, I'm quite sure, I don't have numbers on this, but just living in Israel and having lived in Israel for many years, for the majority of my adult life, I think that a lot more people are leaving Orthodox Judaism than coming into it. So that's lie number one. And lie number two is that they're going to repopulate. I'll actually add a third lie to that. Lie number two is that they're going to repopulate, or that they're going to build up Orthodox Judaism by having many kids. So, of course, Orthodox Jews in Israel, and I think throughout the world, tend to have a lot of kids. I don't know what the average is, but it's probably around 5 or 6 or maybe even 7. 7, 8, 9, 10 children in a family is not unheard of. And one of the reasons they're doing this is to try to increase their numbers by having a lot of children. Yes, they'll say that it's because the first commandment, it's not even a commandment, they'll say the first commandment in the Torah is Pru Uruvu, be fruitful and multiply, and that is the underlying reason why they do it. But they also have an agenda, and that is that they're trying to increase the population of Orthodox Jews, and they think they're going to do that by having a lot of kids. Well, the fact of the matter is most of those kids are going to end up deserting Rabbinical Judaism at one point or another. You already see this trend. There's a big struggle among Orthodox Jews in Israel and in communities outside of Israel, that the kids really, there's a big struggle between the parents and the children, that the parents want their children to be Orthodox Jews, to be dati'im, and the kids really want nothing to do with it. So they'll kind of pay a little bit of lip service to it. Maybe they'll go to a prayer service here and there. They'll go to synagogue here and there, but then they're going to go hang out with their friends afterwards. So I always say, yes, Orthodox Jews, yes, dati'im have tons and tons of kids, because in the end, they're going to end up being Karaites, or they're going to end up at least not being Orthodox Jews. So the more you have, the more chilunim you're creating, the more Karaites you're creating. You're definitely not going to be creating Orthodox Jews, because the days of Orthodox Judaism are numbered. All you have to do is follow the trend line over the past 300, 400, 500 years, and you see that the percentage of adherence among the Jewish people to Orthodox Judaism has gone down from practically 100% to now at around 10%. So keep on having 7, 8, 9, 10 kids, and you'll be creating you'll be creating you'll oops, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. You'll be creating the next generation of Chilonim and the next generation of Qara'im. And again, both of those are more religious, are more adherent to the Torah than the Datim, than the Orthodox Jews. And the third thing they believe, and this is actually true, is they believe that God, that Yahweh, is going to come and punish all of the non-religious. They envision a world where there's going to be a remnant of Jews, and that's going to be them, and the rest are either going to repent, choser b'tshuva, they're going to come back to Orthodox Judaism, or they're going to be killed off in one way or another by God, by Hashem, as they call him. And they really believe this, and they're actually, many of them are actually hoping for this and praying for this and believe this will happen, because they don't see themselves as the heretics. They don't see themselves as the people stuck in the matrix. They don't see themselves as the ones who are following after the stubbornness of their heart and keeping the same distorted form. I can't even call it a form of Torah. This distorted, keeping allegiance to this distorted cult, which got us into this 2,000-year-old mess of exiles, pogroms, holocausts, inquisitions, rapes, murders, and so on. So they don't see themselves as being the heretics, the deviants from Torah. They see themselves as being the loyalists to Torah. But you know what? They will not have the final say. It's always God. It's always Yahweh who has the final say. And I'm sure at some point he will make his will known. And you know what? He already has. Once again, a couple of hundred years ago, close to 100% of all Jews were Orthodox. Now it's down to 10%. I also had another interesting thought today. Okay, so I was going to make this short, but once I get going, I can't stop. I also had another interesting thought today, which is so again, let's take the example of the Chiloni, of the non-religious Jew, your average Israeli, who is maybe going to spend his Shabbat, sitting in again, I'm being a little bit stereotypical here, but not too much. This is a lot of what people do, going to the beach or sitting in a coffee shop with their friends, eating and drinking some coffee and having some food. So now the Orthodox Jews would say that this is a violation of Torah. You're going to a coffee shop, you're eating at a restaurant, you're making Jews work on the Shabbat, you're paying them for their work. But you know what? The Orthodox Jews do exactly the same thing. They do exactly the same thing, except they do it with a loophole, which makes it even more hypocritical, which makes it even worse. So what do? They're going to go to a kosher hotel or a kosher spa, or even a gathering, let's say at a synagogue or a yeshiva or something like that. But let's use the example of a kosher hotel. There are many kosher hotels where you'll see many Orthodox Jews going with their families for the Shabbat, and there will be Jews working there on the Shabbat. Yes, it's true, they do try to have non-Jews work there on the Shabbat, but there will be plenty of Jews working there on the Shabbat, especially the upper management, and even not necessarily the upper management. There'll be Jews working there, and there will be Jews, making the food, serving the food, doing all kinds of things. The same thing as would be the case in the coffee shop for the non-religious Jew sitting in Tel Aviv in the coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon. What's the difference? In the case of the Orthodox Jews and the Orthodox families going to hotels, they'll pay for everything in advance. So there's no actual exchange of money on the Shabbat, but they're getting exactly the same services. So you're still going to have Jews serving the food. You're still going to have Jews preparing the food. You're still going to have Jews managing the hotel. You're still going to have Jews running the hotel on Shabbat, or many of them will be Jews, or at least some of them will be Jews. And the only difference is that there's going to be no exchange of money on the Shabbat. There's only going to be an exchange of money either before the Shabbat or after the Shabbat. So that sanitizes it. That's, what is it? Maybe that's not greenwashing. Maybe that's Shabbat washing or something like that. So through this loophole, they believe that they're not violating Shabbat. But what are they doing? They're not doing anything different than the Chiloni, than the non-religious Jew sitting in the coffee shop in Tel Aviv. The only thing they're doing is they're not paying for their coffee on the spot. They're not paying for their food on the spot. They're paying it for it in advance, but still they're making fellow Jews work. Still, they are paying for services. Still, they're paying for the food. They're paying for the room. They're paying for all of this kind of stuff. It's just that there's no exchange of money on the Shabbat. So this is so typical of rabbinical Judaism, where it's these symbolic actions, okay, or these specific actions that they define as being forbidden on the Shabbat. But the bigger picture, the forest rather than the trees, is completely irrelevant to them. It doesn't matter that they're getting exactly the same services. In fact, more. If you go to a hotel, right, they're actually even getting more services than the non-religious Jew sitting in a coffee house in Tel Aviv who's just getting a cup of coffee and maybe a pizza or something like that. But it's okay because they're not paying for it. They're not explicitly paying for it on the Shabbat. That's how they justify it. But they're doing exactly the same thing. Okay? So we see here the hypocrisy. We see the insanity. We see the cultish nature. We see the focus on legalisms, on ceremony rather than on form, rather than substance. And we see this throughout rabbinical Judaism: the selling of the chametz on Passover to the non-Jew, what's another example? I have a bunch of examples in my head, but I can't think of them at the moment. But we see this, and there are many examples. Okay, but we see this trend again and again and again, that through these little legalistic loopholes or these little ceremonial loopholes, that the rabbinical Jews, the rabbis, actually allow their constituents to violate the underlying rule more than just the average person, because they allow for these loopholes. So again, let's say in the case of selling your chametz on Passover, for those of you who don't know, so you're supposed to get rid of your chametz on Passover. I say that if it's a lot and you have trouble getting rid of it, you can actually just put it somewhere where it can't be seen, hide it away in a corner, in a closet, in the basement, or something like that. But either way, don't if you're going to do that, then don't pretend, as if you're not doing it. Okay. So what do the rabbis do? They say you don't have to get rid of any of your chametz, of any of your leavened bread. You can keep it all. Just again, put it somewhere, like in the basement or something like that. That's what we used to do growing up. That's what my father used to do. He used to move all the chametz down to the basement. And then what do? You symbolically, sign a contract where you're selling all your chametz to a non-Jew, to a goy. And once you've done that, it's no longer your chametz. So even if it's there in your house, even though it's never moved from your house, it just moved down to the basement or something like that, it's technically not yours anymore. So no problem. You can just leave it there. Another example I thought of was the Shemitah year, the 7th year. So there's this idea of hetem mechira, where you are not supposed to, we know that, we saw in Leviticus chapter 25, you're not supposed to work the land every 7 years. And the rabbinical Jews have come up with this legal workaround, this loophole called hetem mechira, where they again symbolically sell their land to a goy during the 7th year and then buy it back in the 8th year. And so therefore it's not their land, so they can work it. Okay, all this kind of nonsense, all these kinds of loopholes, all this kind of hypocrisy. We see that actually the rabbinical Jews are in far greater violation of the Torah than, again, your average non-religious Jew, your average Chiloni, just sitting in a coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon, having his coffee and having his croissant or whatever he may be having. So that's why I say the Chilonim or the Datiim, and the Datiim and the Chilonim. The average Israeli is actually is keeping the Torah, is far closer to keeping the Torah than the Orthodox Jew, who's often La La Land, who's often some bizarre, distorted matrix, some bizarre, distorted cult that is just a far cry, is derivative distortion, a derivative religion, a distortion of true Torah. Okay, so those are my thoughts for today. Enough said about that. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom, self-taught philosopher, Vania, Paul. I see some of the regular faces here. And so welcome. Okay, we want to talk about a little bit today, talking about rabbinical Judaism. I want to bring in the idea of the HaKnesseth HaGedolah. And we'll just call it the Anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah, because that's the way it's really referred to. I'll explain what this is very briefly. We're not going to spend too long on it, because really a talk about it could take hours. but I want to bring in the basic idea of what it is and why it's so important to the rabbis, and why there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever for its existence, that it actually does not fall under historical fact, but falls under the category, falls under the rubric of rabbinical propaganda. So what is the HaKnesseth HaGedolah? The HaKnesseth HaGedolah in English is called the Great Assembly, and sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the Anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah, the members of the Great Assembly. So the members of the Great Assembly are obviously those who supposedly sat in this Great Assembly, and the Great Assembly is the assembly itself. So let's take a look. Let me share the screen, and we'll go to the one rabbi that I do trust. That's Rabbi Wikipedia. Not perfect, but somewhat reliable. So let's go to him, and let's see how we're going to do this here. I think that should do it. See if you guys can see the screen, and you can. So we're going to learn very briefly about the Great Assembly, and then we're going to see why it's so important to rabbinical propaganda. And then we're going to see very briefly the facts about it, or its existence or lack thereof. So let's just read a little bit through Wikipedia. Again, I'm just going to make sure very quickly that everyone sees the screen. And you guys can all hear me. You guys can all see me. So let's do a sound check as always. So what is this thing? Okay, so let's delve into it here. Okay. Just give me 1 second, please. And just a little bit of activity in the background here, so just give me 1 second. Okay, so we're reading now from Wikipedia. According to Jewish tradition, and that means a rabbinical tradition, the Great Assembly, which is in Hebrew, that's going to be called the HaKnesseth HaGedolah, or the HaKnesseth HaGedolah, Great Assembly. Also translated as the Great Synagogue or the Great Synod, was an assembly, and I'm going to say supposedly, an assembly of possibly 120 scribes, sages, and prophets, which supposedly existed from the early Second Temple period around 516 BCE to the early Hellenistic period, which began in the region with Alexander's conquest in 332 BCE, roughly coinciding with the Persian hegemony over the nation of Israel. The assembly's members, known as the Anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah, men of the Great Assembly, traditionally included such figures as Haggai. That's the book we're learning right now, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this in today. Zechariah, that's the book we learned previously, the book of Zechariah, Zechariah. Malachi, that's the book we learned previous to that. Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, and a number of other people, including Mordecai, is supposedly from the Purim story, even though he was in Persia, right? He lived in Susa, in the capital. I think it was actually technically the summer capital of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. And so I don't know how he ends up in the Great Assembly, since all the rest of these people are back in Israel, but somehow they stick him in the assembly as well. I guess I think they have a tradition that he returned to Israel, although there's no evidence for that. There is the mention of, if I'm not mistaken, someone named Mordecai returning from Persia. In the return, the members, the names that are listed in the returns of the return of the Jews from Persia to Israel, but Mordecai was a very common name, and there's absolutely no indication whatsoever that it's the same Mordecai from the Purim story. Okay, so among the developments in Judaism that are attributed to the sages of this period, or the fixing of the Jewish biblical canon, including the book of Ezekiel, Daniel, Esther, 12 minor prophets, the introduction of the Feast of Purim, and the institution of many prayers and rituals, including the Amidah prayer. Okay, so this is the HaKnesseth HaGedolah. This is the supposed idea of the Great Assembly. And so we see it has some of the leading figures from the, shall we say, the last books of the Tanakh. So Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, 3 prophets that we have studied. We're in the process of studying Haggai right now. Ezra, Nehemiah, who came back from Persia. Daniel, the prophet who there's no indication whatsoever that he was outside of Babylon/Persia, but they included him. Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Mordechai, Zerubbabel, we mentioned, was one of the early returnees to the land of Israel. Okay, but so this is this idea of the Knesset Gedolah, that it seated all of these late figures from the Tanakh, but let's get down to the meat of the matter. So the members of the Great Assembly are designated in the Mishnah as those who occupied a place in the chain of tradition between the prophets and the Tanaim. So this is the key. So the rabbis have created this concept of the Great Assembly because it serves a very important polemic purpose in their entire framework, or shall I say the entire foundation, false foundation on which they wish to stand, to prove that they are the loyal or the correct inheritors of tradition dating all the way back to Moses. So to make a long story short, I'm just going to put in my own words here, and then we'll look at it a bit more here from Wikipedia. To make a long story short, the rabbis created this concept, this false concept, and we'll see there's no historical evidence that it ever existed. They created this fantasy of the Great Assembly because this body, this assembly, supposedly included the latest prophets and the earliest Tanaim. What are the Tanaim? The Tanaim are the rabbis, the earliest rabbis, to make a long story short. Okay, so this is supposedly an assembly in which the latest prophets sat together with the earliest rabbis, and therefore these latest prophets transmitted the traditions to the earliest rabbis. So we see the importance. This is the linchpin in the rabbis' entire claim that they have loyally inherited the tradition all the way back to Moses. And we're going to look at the very famous statement in Pirkei Avot, in Mishnah Avot, in just a second, and we'll see exactly what we're talking about here. In fact, let's do that right now. So I'm going to switch over to, this is the Mishnah. For those of you who don't know what the Mishnah is the first extant compendium of rabbinical law and rabbinical theology, law, philosophy, mostly law. But in this case, we're looking at what's called Mishnah Avot, also called Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers. It's often translated into, and it starts off by the rabbis' claim for their chain of tradition, for their stamp of approval, or their proof that they inherited the true tradition, and therefore the form of Judaism that they have come up with is therefore gets a stamp of approval, or is a loyal chain of tradition going all the way back to Moses. That's their claim. And the linchpin in this claim is this body known as the Great Assembly. So let's read a little bit in Pirkei Avot. Again, this is the Mishnah, written in approximately 200 CE according to most scholars, although there's some debate about that, but we'll just go with the 200 CE date. So it says here, let me make this a bit bigger. So it says here, Moshe kibel Torah mi Sinai. I'll translate. Well, you have a translation right below, so I might as well use that. Umisarah li Yoshua, with Yoshua l'zkenim l'nevi'im u'nevi'im misurah. Misaruha le'anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah. Him amru shlosha dvarim, etc. Okay, so let's just translate into the English. So it says, Moses received the Torah at Sinai, transmitted to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the Great Assembly. And the rest is not relevant right now. But we see here, let's just go on to the next verse, and we'll see why this is important. So I'm going to read the Hebrew again. Shimon HaTzadik haya mish yar'eh HaKnesseth HaGedolah. Mishayarei HaKnesseth HaGedolah. So Shimon the righteous was one of the survivors, was one of the last men of the Great Assembly. And he used to say, who cares what he used to say? Who gives a shit what he used to say? Excuse my French. Okay. The point is that Shimon the righteous is one of the earliest rabbis. If we had time, we'd go dig a bit deeper into who is this Shimon HaTzadik, but he's one of the earliest Tanaim, he's one of the earliest rabbis. And therefore we see that he, according to this Mishnah Avot, this Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, Mishnah 2, Mishnah Bet, that he was among the last of the Knesset of Gdolah, the Great Assembly. So we see the purpose here. The purpose is to say that the latest prophets, again, if we look at the English here, okay, the elders transmitted to the prophets to the men of the Great Assembly. And in that Great Assembly, according to the next verse, according to the next Mishnah, according to the next verse, was Shimon the righteous, Shimon HaTzadik, one of the early rabbis. So the Great Assembly, the members of the Great Assembly, have a very specific polemic purpose within Rabbinical Judaism. It's to connect the latest prophets with the earliest rabbis, and therefore establish or attempt to establish a chain of tradition going all the way back, or going from the rabbis all the way back to Moses. This is what they want to do, and this is what they need to do to sell to the people this idea that their form of Judaism, their distorted form of Judaism, is actually has the stamp of approval of the prophets and all the way back to Moses, and that's why this is so important. So, what do we have to say about this? Well, first of all, as we'll see, there's absolutely no historical evidence whatsoever that this Great Assembly ever existed. Again, it's a fantasy, not a fantasy. It's a polemic. It's a story made up by the rabbis in order to justify, or in order to give credence to their form of Judaism, that it actually is linked in a chain of tradition all the way back to Moses. So, and this is the linchpin. So we can all agree with this part. Moses received Torah at Sinai, transmitted to Joshua to the elders. I don't know if it's that simple. After Joshua, we have the other judges. It doesn't matter. Okay, the elders to the prophets. This is a little bit simplified, but it doesn't matter. But at least, okay, Joshua, elders, at least those who were loyal to God, to Yahweh, who were loyal to the Torah. We see examples of elders that were not loyal to the Torah. All you have to do is look in the Ezekiel chapter, I believe it's 8 or 9, where you see the elders bringing abominable sacrifices on the altar of Yahweh and worshiping foreign gods, including the Queen of Heaven, Malkat Shamayim, and doing all kinds of horrible things. But okay, let's say the loyal elders, prophets, these are all within the realm of institutions that we believe were loyal to Yahweh, that kept the original form of Torah. But then here's the key. I'm going to highlight it. I grab my little writing tool, which I can't stand, but I have to download another one. Okay, and the prophets, the men of the Great Assembly. This is the key right there. If you need to find one sentence in all of the literature, which spans thousands and thousands of books over many, many years, decades, centuries, and millennia, if you need to find one sentence which is key to the claim that Rabbinical Judaism is authorized by God, is authorized in a way going all the way back to the time of Moses, to the time of Moshe, then this is a sentence right here. And the prophets, the men of the Great Assembly. If we can show, and we can easily show, that this is a bunch of BS, which it is, then all of Rabbinical Judaism, all of the claims of Rabbinical Judaism to be loyal to the Torah of Moshe falls on its face, and indeed it does. So, let's look at some evidence. Okay, but again, I want you guys to all understand the importance of this. I do not enjoy being infamous in my town. It's not true. That is absolutely not true. I actually just want to teach Torah, spread Torah, talk about Torah, and I did not in any way, shape, or form intend to be, but it was not my doing, believe me. So I don't think that is definitely not true. Anyway, neither here nor there. So I'm happy because it gets the word of charism out, but it's not something that I intentionally tried to do. I just tried to say what I believe to be the truth, and apparently saying the truth in this day and age is something that makes a person infamous. Okay, so do we all understand the importance of the concept of the HaKnesseth HaGedolah, or the Anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah? Why it's so important to the claim by the rabbis that their form of religion is the authorized form of religion, going all the way back to Moses. We all understand that. Okay, if this is the linchpin in their claim of chain of tradition. The Anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah is the linchpin. It's again where it's a body where the latest prophets sat with the earliest rabbis, and therefore were able to transmit the Torah from the true understanding of the Torah from the latest prophets to the earliest rabbis. Okay, so is there any evidence for this Anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah? Okay, well, let's take a look. So I'll go to I'm just going to read here from another one of the rabbis that I trust, and then kind of trust. Not really. I don't trust. I don't trust him. Well, one of the rabbis that I trust more than most rabbis, we'll call him ChatGPT. And let's see what ChatGPT spits out, and then I'll talk about some of the points just to understand what's going on. So this is what ChatGPT has to say. The short answer is there is no independent historical evidence that the Anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah, the members of the Great Assembly, ever existed as a formal body in the way that later rabbinic literature describes them. Almost everything we know about them comes from rabbinic sources written centuries after the Persian period in which they are supposed to have existed. So there's no mention whatsoever from contemporary sources. So the earliest reference, as we saw, is in Pirkei Avot, is in the Mishnah. Again, that's the original compendium of rabbinical law, theology, philosophy, and that was written in 200 CE. So the Anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah, the members of the Great Assembly was supposed to have actually existed during the Persian period, starting in around 500 BCE. So we're talking about the first mention of it ever. The first mention of it ever is in the Mishnah, and that is 200 CE. That's 700 years later. There is no mention anywhere in any other writing whatsoever, whether it's external writings, whether it's internal Jewish writings, and there were some internal Jewish writings such as the Apocrypha, the Sfarim Chitzoniyim, Josephus. We're going to talk about all of those. Again, we're just going to briefly talk about them. We're not going to go into a whole lecture here. But so let's read on. So this is again what Rabbi ChatGPT has to say. Later rabbinic literature greatly expands their role, or creates their role. They're credited with, and we already mentioned, doesn't matter what they're credited with, but preserving the Torah after the exile, etc. The membership is often given as 120 elders, including figures such as Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and sometimes even Daniel and Mordechai. So why does ChatGPT say sometimes even Daniel and Mordechai? Because Daniel and Mordechai were in Persia. They were in Babylon. Daniel was there as the final king of Babylon died, and the empire was taken over by the Medians, and then control was given eventually to the Persians, or the Persians took control. The Medians and Persians were both from Iran. They were both from the same area. They were just kind of different competing tribes. At any rate, and Mordechai was in Susa. Mordechai was in the summer capital of the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire. But anyway, they magically, transport Daniel and Mordechai back to Israel. Like I guess what was it from Star Trek? They teleport them back to Israel so they can be part of the Anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah. However, these descriptions are found mainly in the Babylonian Talmud and Midrash Rabbah, compiled many centuries later. Okay, so let me go on here. So another proof is the elephantine papyri. So these are Jewish documents that were found in Elephantine. Elephantine is an island. There was a Jewish settlement dating back to, I think, around the 5th century BCE, maybe even a bit further. A Jewish settlement where they had actually set up a temple, and they brought sacrifices to Yahweh. Whether that was the correct thing to do or not is another story. But there are many letters from letters of correspondence from Elephantine to Jerusalem, and none of them ever mentioned any body called a Great Assembly or anything even alluding to it. And here, Rabbi ChatGPT says they mentioned correspondence with the high priest in Jerusalem and the Persian governors, but never any Great Assembly. And these documents, again, this is Rabbi ChatGPT says, these documents are among our best sources for Persian period Judaism. Another one is Josephus. So Josephus was a Pharisaic Kohen, a Pharisaic priest in the time of the Great Revolt against Rome. That's in 66 to 70 CE. And he was the head of the armies in the Galilee, in the north of the country. I live right near the Galilee. I live in the Golan Heights. And he was eventually captured by the Romans and magically transformed into an historian of Judaism, or particularly that era, but also previous eras. He wrote a number of books detailing in great detail, so much so that you can fall asleep very easily on a page of any of Josephus's books, because it's excruciating detail. And he details many of the periods of Jewish history. Again, he's writing in the 1st century CE. He's writing around 70 CE, and he never ever mentions anything like a Great Assembly. ChatGPT sums it up by saying that silence is striking if such an important governing body had existed. If it was so important, here we have this major assembly, where the supposedly the last prophet sat with the earliest rabbis. And again, Josephus goes into excruciating detail about all of these periods, including the Persian period, and never single mention of a HaKnesseth HaGedolah, of a Great Assembly. Other Second Temple literature, and these are all here. These are the first three, at least, are books of the Apocrypha: First Maccabees, Second Maccabees, Jubilees. So First Maccabees and Second Maccabees are historical accounts of the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid Greeks in approximately 165 BCE. So this would have been not long after, or even during the time of the Great Assembly. Actually, Shimon HaTzadik, let's see what dates they give. Let me just look very quickly. Shimon HaTzadik. Let me just check his dates, apparently. Because remember, they said Shimon HaTzadik sat in the Great Assembly. And so he lived, according to Josephus, Shimon HaTzadik lived from approximately 310 to 291 or 300 to 273. Well, they didn't live very long. So around 300 BCE. So we're talking about 100 plus years before the time of the Maccabees. So in other words, the Maccabees would have already known, or the book of Maccabees would have already known about the existence of a HaKnesseth HaGedolah, of a Great Assembly, members of a Great Assembly. But again, no mention whatsoever. No mention in the Dead Sea Scrolls. No mention by Philo. Philo was a Jew living in Egypt, in Alexandria, who was heavily influenced by Greek philosophy. He kind of gives a Greek philosophical interpretation of the Torah. Again, no mention by all of these very central figures who lived after, or at least were contemporary, who lived after the time of supposedly the Great Assembly existed, and no mention whatsoever. To make a long story short, there's not a single mention of anything called the Great Assembly or the members of the Great Assembly until the Mishnah in Avot, which was written in 200 CE. Not a single mention. Okay. Modern historical scholarship. Again, I'm reading from ChatGPT. Most historians conclude that the rabbinical picture is not historically reliable as a literal description. Instead, they generally propose one of several possibilities. I'll just read the first. A later reconstruction. This is probably the majority view. The rabbis wanted an unbroken chain of authority. Moses, Joshua to the prophets, prophets to the Great Assembly to the sages. The Great Assembly functions as the missing link between prophecy and rabbinical Judaism. In this view, it serves primarily as a theological and institutional purpose. In other words, it serves as a polemic, a rabbinical polemic. All right. Anything else we have to say here? I don't think so. Well, I'll read this. Again, this is from ChatGPT. Karaite and critical perspectives. Many Karaite scholars have viewed the Great Assembly tradition as part of the rabbinic effort to legitimize the authority of the oral Torah by creating an institutional bridge between the biblical prophets and the early rabbinical quote-unquote sages. Similarly, many modern critical histories see the tradition as an ideological genealogy rather than an historical record, and so on and so forth. Overall assessment: if we apply the standards historians normally use, seeking contemporary documentation, archaeological evidence, or an independent corroboration, the case is extremely weak. There's not any of this evidence. Let's see if there's anything to add here. Great Assembly, supported only by later rabbinical tradition. So the historical conclusion is that there is no direct evidence for the Great Assembly as an organized institution described in rabbinical literature. It is most plausibly understood as a later rabbinic construction that expresses a chain of authority. And I always like to sum up with this. If you think the rabbis are the only ones who like to establish a chain of authority, we don't need to go any further than the opening books of the Christians of the New Testament. Let's take a look at that for a second. In fact, I'll bring it up here. Should I put my disclaimer up? Unfortunately, again, because of the activity of certain Karaites. Oh, where'd we go? My God. Let's close this out. 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 Leave that open. Let's leave that open. Let's come back here. Upon cross-examination, the rabbinic proposition itself just might have substantive deficiencies. Yes, yeah, you could put it that way. The rabbis have seemingly declined such a fair Deuteronomy 19:15 examination along with willingness to reject everybody. Very good. Okay, so let's take a look for a second at another famous attempt to establish a chain of tradition or a genealogical chain, and that is, of course, the New Testament. So we go to the New Testament. I'm going to put up a disclaimer. Again, sadly, I have to do this. So let me do it this way. Banners, create the World Alliance. Let's see. We'll write this together. The World Alliance of Qara'im is in no way, shape, or form associated with Christianity, or Messianic Judaism by quoting the New Testament. We are merely using it as and its members. And its members are in no way World Alliance of Qara'im and its members are in no way, shape, or form associated with Christianity or Messianic Judaism. By little girl, no, little girl, no. You can't crawl on my computer. This cat is so cute. By quoting the New Testament, we're using it as an historical source. Okay, that works. Let's do that. Boom, head banner. Did it do it? Show. Okay. Oops. Hide. Let's fix that typo. No shape form. So or Messianic by quoting the New Testament, we are merely using it as an historical source to do certain. So, okay, good. Show. Okay, so now, and again, I'm sorry I have to do this, but for obvious reasons, again, the activities of certain Karaites within the Christian world, I just want to make it absolutely clear where we're standing when we look at the New Testament. So let's look at the New Testament now and bring it up. What, sweetheart? You're hungry? Soon, sweetie. Okay. Yes, baby. I'll give you food. I know, sweetie. You're hungry. Just a second, okay? Maybe I'll take a break and give you some food. Okay, so we go to Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, and right away, just like Pirkei Avot, just like the Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 1, verse 1, digs right into this supposed chain of tradition. So Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, the very first book, the very first verse of the New Testament. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And then we have a whole genealogical chain, supposedly, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, Peretz, Chetzron. We'll skip ahead. We don't have to go through all of them. David, down to Solomon, down to Rehoboam, Asa, who was a righteous king. Jehoshaphat was a righteous king. Again, basically to all of the kings. Menashe was definitely not a righteous king. Josiah, exile in Babylon, Shealtiel. We saw him mentioned in, I believe it was in, right, he's the father of Zerubbabel. So here we have, okay, so let's just focus on this for a second. Okay, so so this is the exile to Babylon. This is now the return from Babylon to Israel, and then so on and so forth. And then we get down to Eleazar, the father of Matan, Matan, the father of Jacob, Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Thus, there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile in Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. So we see here the first mention, or the first thing that the New Testament does, is to attempt to establish a chain of tradition linking Jesus, Yeshua, all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this ain't something new. And also, it's interesting to point out that the New Testament and the Mishnah were written not too far, or the Synoptic Gospels. This is one of the Synoptic Gospels, the original, shall we say, the original Gospels of the New Testament, were written not too far apart in history. So the Synoptic Gospels, including Matthew, are said to have been written within about 50 years of the death of Jesus. So we're talking again right around maybe 70, 80 CE, and then the Mishnah was written about 100 years later, a little bit more than 100 years later. So they're not exactly contemporary, but they're in that same Roman / post-Roman period. So it might have been a very common thing to try to establish a chain of tradition or a chain of genealogy in order to link whatever you wanted to prove had authority back to previous people or previous institutions that actually did have authority. Okay, so Mishnah Avot 1:1 and Matthew chapter 1 verse 1 have a lot in common when we look at it. Okay, all right. Any questions? I hope to do a much more detailed study on this, and in fact, I have an idea of when and how I'm going to do this with a certain I don't want to say anything until it's all worked out, but I hope to do it on a certain podcast and talk about this in much greater detail. Okay, so that's it. So we see that the again, just to sum up, the linchpin, the key to the rabbinical claim that their form of Judaism has the authority, the stamp of approval from God Himself, is this idea of the men of the Great Assembly, Anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah, which is a creation of the rabbis, that in which the latest prophets sat together with the earliest rabbis, and therefore the latest prophets, who we know can trace their tradition or their understanding of Torah back to Moses, transferred their this tradition to the earliest rabbis, and therefore the rabbis have the stamp of approval. Rabbinical Judaism has a stamp of approval going all the way back to Moses, and by implication has the stamp of approval of God. So this is the linchpin. This is the key chain in the link, the key link in the chain, the false chain that the rabbis use to attempt to claim that their form of Judaism is the original form of Judaism, or at least is the form of Judaism that has a stamp of approval going all the way back to Moses himself. Okay? Any questions, any comments? I'm sorry, I don't have time to get into Melchizedek. Everyone makes such a big deal about Melchizedek. I don't understand what the big deal is. He was a priest in Abrahamic times, and that's it. Nothing more, nothing less. There's not really that much that the Tanakh has to say about him, and I don't really see what the big deal is. I don't understand why everyone makes such a big deal about Melchizedek. Okay, that's my answer in short. Any questions, any comments about what we've spoken about here? If not, then we'll take a quick break, and then we're going to dig into the book of Haggai. We're going to finish off the book of Haggai, and then we'll go into Leviticus chapter 27. Let's see if I can feed this little kitten in the meantime. So we will see you back in just a couple of minutes, and I'll put some music on as usual, and we'll come back and dig into the book of Haggai. Just give me a second here to get this all set up.
צמא נפשי לאלוקים, צמא נפשי לאלוקים, לאלך. מתי יבוא, מתי יבוא ואראה פני האלוקים. הילדה על אפיקי מים, כנפשי תערום אליך אלוקים, כהילדה על אפיקי מים, נפשי תעוג אליך אלוקים. צמא נפשי לאלוקים, צמא נפשי לאלוקים, ללחי. מתי יבוא וראה פני האלוקים. הילדה על אפיקי מים, נפשי תעוג אליך אלוקים. צמא נפשי לאלוקים, צמא נפשי לאלוקים, ללחי. מתי יבוא וראה פני האלוקים. על אפיקי מים, כנפשי תעוג אליך
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יכה קר, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה. השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה. השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. אוי 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 שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרי מעם השם עושה שמיים וארץ. אני אתן למות רגליך על ינום שומרך. אוי 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 שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים.
Okay, so we are back. Welcome back. Once again, this is the World Alliance of Qara'im Shabbat Torah study. I'm Hakham Melech Rahmiel Ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im. And we're going to dig into the book of Haggai. In fact, we're going to finish the book of Haggai. We only have a couple of verses left. Let's close this off. So we're going to finish the book of Haggai. And in order to do so, let me share the screen. Okay. Let's close that out. We can close that out. And we are in Haggai chapter 2. So let's just read through, as I like to do in English. We're just going to read through chapter 2 up until the verse that we got to last time, just to get a bit of context. So we are in verse 20. We're going to be starting in verse 20. So let's read here. So it doesn't say it here. It's in the end of Haggai chapter 1, but it's in the second year of King Darius, on the 21st day of the 7th month. Remember, we said that all of Haggai's prophecies span approximately, I think it's from the first day of the 7th month, was it, until the 24th day of the 9th month, something like that. So they span just a couple of months. On the first day of the 7th month, the word of Yahweh came through the prophet Haggai. Speak to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel. This is one of the people who we just saw that the rabbis claim sat in the Anshei, sat in the HaKnesseth HaGedolah, was one of the Anshei HaKnesseth HaGedolah, one of the members of the Great Assembly. Bunch of baloney. Governor of Judah, to Yoshua ben Yotzadak, the high priest, and to the remnant of the people, ask them, who of you is left who saw this house in its former glory? House speaking about the temple. It's called today the Beit HaMikdash, but really in Tanakh it's always called Beit Yahweh, the house of Yahweh. We're talking about the quote-unquote holy temple. How does it look to you now? Does it seem to you like nothing? Right? So he's speaking to the people, and he's asking them, who remembers that first house, the house of Solomon, that was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE? But now be strong, Zerubbabel, declares Yahweh. Be strong, Yeshua ben Yehotzadak, son of Yehotzadak, the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares Yahweh, and work, for I am with you, declares Yahweh Almighty. Work with what? Work in rebuilding the temple. Okay? This is what I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit remains among you. Do not fear. This is what Yahweh Almighty says. In a little while, I will once more shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I will shake all nations, and what is desired by all nations will come, and I will fill this house with glory, says Yahweh Almighty. The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares Yahweh Almighty. The glory of this present house will be greater than the glory of the former house, says Yahweh Almighty. And in this place I will grant peace, declares Yahweh Almighty. And here's the final prophecy of Haggai. So yes, it is indeed on the 24th day of the 9th month. In the second year of Darius, the word of Yahweh came to the prophet Haggai. This is what Yahweh Almighty says. Ask the priests what the law says. Remember this from last week. So he's using this as a polemic, actually. If someone carries consecrated meat in the fold of their garment, and that fold touches some bread or stew, some wine, olive oil, or other food, does it become consecrated? The priests answered, no. Then Haggai said, if a person defiled by contact with the dead body touches one of these things, does it become defiled? Yes, the priests replied, it becomes defiled. Then Haggai said, so it is with this people. No, little girl. You cannot come up on the table. Sweetheart, stay right here. Okay, come. Right here. Then Haggai said, so it is with this people and this nation in my sight, declares Yahweh. Whatever they do and whatever they offer, there is defiled. Now give careful thought to this from this day on. Consider how things were before one stone was laid on another in Yahweh's temple. When anyone came to a heap of 20 measures, there were only 10. When anyone went to a wine vat to draw 50 measures, there were only 20. I struck all the work of your hands with blight, mildew, and hail, yet you did not return to me, declares Yahweh. From this day on, from this 24th day of the 9th month, give careful thought to the day when the foundation of Yahweh's temple was laid. Give careful thought. Is there yet any seed left in the barn? Until now, the vine and the fig tree, the pomegranate and the olive tree have not borne fruit. From this day on, I will bless you. So in other words, the prophecy here is that you have not, speaking to the returning exiles, you have not been serious about rebuilding the second temple, and therefore you've not prospered. But from now on, I'm with you, and you're going to prosper in your work in building the second temple. And then we have the last couple of verses of Haggai. And actually, excuse me just 1 second. I want to grab some water so you guys can read that in the English there, and I'll be right back. So grab a glass of water. Okay, so all right, so now we're going to dig into the Hebrew. And so we're in Haggai chapter 2, verse 20. I'm going to start in the Hebrew now. So we have here, Waihi Devar Yahweh Shenit El Haggai Asrim Arba'a Lechodesh Lemor. So the word of Yahweh was for a second time upon Haggai on the 24th day of the month. And we're talking about the 7th month. Sweetheart, you cannot, sweetie girl, I know you want to crawl all over this table. You can't. It's a no. Okay? Stay there on the chair. All right? Now you want to crawl on me. Sweetie, okay. All right. We'll see how this works out. All right, baby. Come. All right, sweetie. What, baby? I know. Okay, stay right here, okay? Come. Lie down. What? What, little girl? Want to stay right there? We'll give it a shot, okay? Okay. Come, sweetie. Come. There we go. That could work. No, you can't crawl on the computer keyboard. Little girl. Okay, you want to stay like that? That's fine. That's fine. It's a very cuddly little girl. Okay, we'll see how that works out, okay? Are you comfy? Beautiful. Oh, you beautiful cat. Okay. Emor. If you guys only saw what position I have to sit in to allow this little girl to be here while I'm typing on the computer. Okay. All right, Surah. It's fine. You all do it. Okay. Emor el Zerubbabel pachat Yehuda lemor. So say to Zerubbabel. So him already mentioned a number of times, not just in here, but also in the book of Malachi, and also I believe in the book of Zechariah. Again, he's one of the early returnees from the Persian exile, and Pachat Yehuda, so the governor of Yehuda, to say, Ani mar'ish et shamayim wa'et ha'aretz. I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth. Let me just see something here. And didn't we see this earlier? We saw it in verse 6. This is what Yahweh Almighty says, in a little while I will once more shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I will shake all nations, and what is desired by all nations will come, and I will fill this house with glory. So this seems to be kind of a what, sweetie girl? Sweetheart, come. Oh, baby. Okay. All right. It's okay. Stay right like that. Okay. So verse 21, Ani marish et hashamayim wa et haaretz. I'm going to shake heavens and the earth. Verse 22. Wa'afachti kisei mamlachot oishmad lichozek mamlachot hagoyim. And I will overturn thrones of kingdoms, and I will destroy the power of the kingdoms of the nations. Wa'afachti. Oops. Sweetheart, sweetie, I'm going to put you over here, okay? I can't. I know. Do you know what Torah is? Do you know what Torah is? Oh, sweetie. All right, baby. Okay. Okay. You want to come here? What's that? Want to stay there? Can you guys see what's going on here? I don't know if you can see there's a cat on my shoulder. All right, sweetie. You try staying there. We'll give it a shot, okay? Okay. I'll try to get this to work. Okay, so Nafachti Merkava ורוכביה וירדו סוסים ורוכביהם איש בחרב אחיו. So I will overturn chariots and their riders, and horses will go down. ורוכביהם along with their riders, ish b'cherev achiv, each man by the sword of his brother. In other words, that's a prophecy of these armies, of these kingdoms that Yahweh is going to destroy. It's basically gonna civil war, I guess you can call it. Right? In fact, in modern Hebrew, civil war is called Milchemet Achim, literally a war of brothers. And here we have Ish Becherev Achiu. So each person at the sword by the sword of his brother. So either that's talking about the people going insane and killing each other off in the army camp, as we saw in the time of in Hezekiah, the Assyrians, or we're talking about some kind of civil war. Verse 23. So, Biyom Hahu Ne'um Yahweh Tzivaoth. On that day declares Yahweh of hosts. Oops, grab that. Ekachecha Zerubbabel ben Shealtiel Avdi. So I will take you, Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, my servant. Ne'um Yahweh, declares Yahweh. V'samticha kechotam, and I will turn you into they translate this as a signet ring, as a stamp. So the idea of a signet ring was a ring with a certain insignia on it, signet insignia, and that was like your signature, right? A seal. Because I've chosen you. What is you whom I have chosen, declares Yahweh of hosts. So this is clearly a prophecy that is not an end of days prophecy. It's a prophecy directly for Zerubbabel, that there's going to be all kinds of upheaval at that time. I will overturn royal thrones and shatter the power of foreign kingdoms. And we're talking again approximately 500 BCE thereabouts. So I'm not sure what historical event may be referring to. Let's do a little bit of Robert Alter and see what he has to say about it. So verse 20, I'm about to shake heavens and earth. This passage that begins here is a kind of concluding recapitulation of verses 6 to 9, which we read earlier. In this instance, explicit battle imagery is introduced. The overturning of chariots and horses and riders, each by the sword of his fellow. What is suggested is a general panic in the armies of the nations in which confusion and mutual slaughter take place. I will set you as a seal. The expression is elliptical. The ellipsis is elucidated in the Song of Songs 8:6, one of the verses that is often quoted as proof against tefillin. It's phylacteries. We won't get into it right now, but if you read the article on Karaite Insights about tefillin, then you'll see. Sweetheart, come here. Okay. A seal on your arm. For you I have chosen. While neither king nor anointed appears in the text, might Haggai have feared that these could be politically dangerous terms? Strong implication is that Zerubbabel is the descendant of the line of David, now presiding over the rebuilding of the temple, is a chosen heir to David's throne. Okay. I'm sweet. Stay right there. Okay. All right, little girl. You okay? Are you okay, sweetie? Hmm? Okay. Very cuddly little animal. Okay, I may have to put it down because it is a bit difficult to concentrate with a cat on your shoulder, but we'll do the best we can. Okay, and that concludes the book of Haggai. And yeah, and that's it. A short book, a very straightforward book. So if we had to sum up the theme, Haggai, the theme of Haggai is the rebuilding of the temple, rebuilding of the second temple, and the idea that the focus has to be on rebuilding the temple. And because the Jews did not focus on rebuilding, were not serious about rebuilding the temple, they were not successful. But that now Yahweh is with the people of Israel in rebuilding the second temple, which of course they indeed do go ahead and do. Okay, any questions, any comments? Log Cabin says, it seems particularly poignant that from contextual clues, put that up, that from contextual clues, Haggai seems to have been very old and was one of the first generations of the exile, and who had himself seen the house in its former glory. I don't know what contextual clues that you're talking about. If you want to point those out, please do. I don't think there are any contextual clues. If you're talking about the fact that Haggai says the words, consider the house or the house in its former glory, the exact words. So in the prophecy here, who of you is left to sow the house in its former glory? Does it look to you now? Does it not seem to you like nothing? So this doesn't, I don't see any clue here that Haggai necessarily saw it in its, or saw the original house. This is prophecy, right? This is the word of Yahweh through the prophet Haggai. I don't know if Haggai is even dated, if his life is dated, because we know so little about him. Let's see. What, for instance, Wikipedia has to say. Okay, life, scarcely anything is known about his personal history, with the book of Haggai offering no biographical details about his ancestry or anything else in his life outside of the prophecies of 520 BCE. Haggai is only mentioned in one of the book of the Bible, the book of Ezra. He may have been one of the captives taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. Some commenters suggest he may have been an old man and seen the previous temple before its destruction due to what he says about the former glory of the temple in Haggai 2:3. He began God's prophecy about 16 years after the return of Jews to Judah. His prophecy was in 520 BCE. So the return was in 536 BCE. The work of rebuilding the temple had been put to a stop through the intrigues of the Samaritans. After having been suspended for 18 years, the work was resumed through the efforts of Haggai and Zechariah, and so on and so forth. So he's only mentioned in the book of Ezra 5:1 and 6:14. We could take a look at that very briefly. Let's look at it in the English. Ezra 5:1. So this is what we get in Ezra 5:1. Now Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the prophet, the descendant of Edo, prophesied to the Jews in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them. So that doesn't give us much information, right? Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Yeshua, son of Tzadok, to work to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem, and the prophets of God were with them, supporting them. And then we have all these problems with the attempted building. And then in Ezra 6:14, so the elders of the Jews continued to build and prosper under the preaching of Haggai and the prophet Zechariah, descendant of Edo. They finished building the temple according to the command of God, the God of Israel, and the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, Artaxerxes, kings of Persia. The temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month of Adar in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. So that means 4 years after Haggai was prophesying, because we know that Haggai was prophesying when? The 2nd year of Darius. Right? The 2nd year of King Darius. So if according to Ezra chapter 6:15, it was completed in the 6th year, so that's approximately in the springtime, late winter, about 4 years later. So that means in 516, if I did the math right, in 516 BCE is when the second temple was completed. Then the people of Israel, the priests, the Levites, and the rest of the exiles celebrated the dedication of the house of God with joy. The dedication of this house of God, they offered 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 male lambs, etc., and they installed the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their groups for the service of God at Jerusalem according to what is written in the book of Moses. Notice, according to what is written in the book of Moses, not according to some oral law, not according to the rabbis, not according to some, the Anshei HaKnesseth, HaGedolah, or any of that, the members of the Great Assembly. None of that baloney. On the 14th day of the first month, so they completed on the third day of the 12th month, the 14th day of the first month, the following month, the exiles celebrated the Passover. The priests and the Levites had purified themselves and were all ceremonially clean. The Levites slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the exiles, for their relatives, the priests and for themselves. So the Israelites who had returned from the exile ate it together with all who had separated themselves from the unclean practices of their Gentile neighbors in order to seek Yahweh, the God of Israel. For 7 days they celebrated with joy the festival of unleavened bread, because Yahweh had filled them with joy by changing the attitude of the king of Assyria, so that he assisted them in the work on the house of God, the God of Israel. It says the king of Assyria, but it's really the king of Persia. But the Persians had essentially taken over the Assyrian Empire. So that's probably the reason it says the king of Assyria. Okay, so we don't really get any information about Haggai. Okay, but again, the Dead Sea Scrolls are not canonical. I'm not going to get into that right now. Okay, we're going to get too far off track. All right. So what we want to do is get into now little girl, just a little bit. There you go, sweet. There you go. A little bird perched on my shoulder. So what we want to do now is get into Leviticus chapter 27. So let's do that. Let me switch this out here. So we're in verse 16. Yes. Okay, so we're in verse 16. We'll read through. Let me close this out, close that out. Let's bring up Everett Fox. And again, we are in verse 16. So, sweetie, just a drop. There you go, baby. Okay. So let's review. So we're talking about valuation of items that are dedicated to God as nidarim, as oaths. Let me just change this over also. Okay. So let's just read through. I'll read through on the Everett Fox translation from the beginning. Yahweh spoke to Moses, Moshe saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, any man when he would make a vow offering in your assessed equivalent of persons to Yahweh, right? So you're in a rough spot and you ask Yahweh for help, and one of the ways you ask Yahweh for help is to say, Yahweh, if you get me out of this mess, I will dedicate such and such to you, $1,000 or 1,000 gold coins, or a sheep, or as we can see here, you can even say you're going to dedicate people to Yahweh. But of course, you cannot actually go ahead and dedicate people for Yahweh. So we're given valuations for various categories of people, and then other things below. So your assessment shall be, if a male from the age of 20 years up to the age of 60 years, his assessment shall be 50 silver shekels by the holy shrine's shekel. And if it's a female, your assessment shall be 30 shekels. If the age is from 5 years up to the age of 20 years, your assessment for a male is 20 shekels, and so on. I don't need to go through all of this. We went through it. If he sinks down in poverty lower than the assessment, he's to be stood up before the priest, and the priest is to assess the amount for him according to what the hand of the one making the vow can reach. The priest is to assess him. Okay, so that is through verse 8, dedication of a human being to Yahweh as fulfillment of a vow, or as part of a vow. If it concerns an animal from which they can bring near a near offering, that's a sacrifice to Yahweh, all of what he gives from it to Yahweh is to be a holy portion. So if it's a kosher animal, quote unquote, and you vow that you're going to bring it to Yahweh, then you bring it, because it can be sacrificed on the altar. He's not to substitute for it, and he's not to exchange it, good for ill or ill for good. If they exchange, exchange animal for animal. It will be that it and its exchanged one will be a holy portion. If it concerns any tameh animal, so tameh is a quote unquote unkosher animal, from which they may not bring near offering for Yahweh, the animal is to be stood before the priest, and the priest is to make assessment for it between good and ill, according to your assessment by the priest, so it shall be. And if he wants to redeem it, redeem it. He is to add its fifth part to your assessment. And what if you dedicate your house? Now, a man, when he hallows his house, his holy property to Yahweh, the priest is to assess it between good and ill, as the priest assesses it. Thus, its cost shall be established. And if one who hallows it would redeem his house, is to add a fifth part to the silver of your assessment, and it shall remain his. And that's what we got up to. Okay, so assessments for human beings, assessments for animals, and assessments for one's house. Okay, so we're going to pick it up in 16. Sweetie girl, just move just a bit. There we go. Good girl. Okay, baby. That's so. Right. So 16. Okay, so now we have the dedication of a field, and this is very important. We saw in Leviticus chapter 25 the rules for the laws regarding the redemption of one's field. So every Israelite has a piece of property, piece of land which is theirs by birthright and can never be, what's going on here? And can never be taken away from them. We saw that in Leviticus chapter 25. So here, let's pick it up in verse 16. So verse 16, Va'im misadeh achuzato yakdish ish liyahweh. Okay, so let's just translate up in there. So if from his land inheritance, yakdish ish liyahweh, he dedicates it or he sanctifies it to Yahweh. Okay, so you have your land inheritance. Every Israelite is given a land inheritance. It can never be taken away from them. It's split up among their descendants, among their inheritors, and then so on and so forth. So it's subdivided each generation. But still, every Israelite has a piece of land which is theirs and can never be taken away. And we saw in Leviticus chapter 25 that if you need to sell it, there's really no such thing as a permanent sale of your land inheritance. You quote unquote sell it until the Jubilee year. In the Jubilee year, it goes back into your hands. So you're not actually selling your land. What you're doing is in effect a long-term lease, and the value of that lease is the number of years that you can harvest crops from it until the Jubilee year, when it returns to its original owner. So there's a mechanism set together. By the way, can you guys hear me all? So I'm sitting a little bit further away from the screen because I have this little kitty on my shoulder. So can we just get a quick sound check? You guys can hear me okay? If not, I can put on my headphones. If you can hear me, please just type in a Y or a 1 so I know that the sound quality is good. I'll just wait a second, please. Okay, good. All right, Hadassah, thank you. So your land inheritance goes back in the Jubilee year, every 50 years. Okay, so what if you dedicate your land inheritance to Yahweh? Well, it's going to be actually surprisingly similar to what we saw in Leviticus chapter 25 when you sell your land inheritance. So so its value, it's going to be valued literally according to its seed. But what that means is according to the number of crops. I'm sorry. One second. So this is talking about the size. Sorry, we'll get to that. My mistake. So according to its seed, Zera Homer Seorim ב-50 shekel kasef. So for each homer of barley, it's valued at 50 silver shekels. So what is a homer? Oh, jeez. That. Okay, so a homer is, as you can see, this is really mire, earth. Okay, chemar. In modern Hebrew, homer just means material. Okay, so earth, mire, clay, a heap, and therefore it's a dry measure, and that's the context that's being used here. So it's dry measure. And here we see in Leviticus chapter 26, 7:16 that we're reading right now, tax 50 shekels. Okay, so let's, oh, what, sweetie? No, you can't sit there. I can't. Sweetie girl, here, I'm gonna put you over there just for a while. Okay, I know, sweetie. Come right here. Okay, I know, sweetie. Come. What, baby? Come right here. Okay. What, baby? Stay right there, okay? What, baby? Right here. Okay. At any rate, it's a dry measure. Okay. So, what, babe? Okay. She's fine. Okay, come. Okay, you sit on my shoulder. Okay. And okay, it doesn't matter exactly how much it is. It's a dry measure of barley seed in this context here. Okay, certain measure of barley seed. What, baby? What? What, sweetie? No, no, I can't do that right now. What, sweetie girl? What? You want to teach the class? Yes? Hmm? Hmm? What, baby? What? What? Come on, I'm going to try to put you over here. Okay? Come, sweetie. I know, sweetie. Come, stay right here. That's okay. We'll cuddle that. It's okay? Stay right here. Stay right here. What, baby? Stay right there. Okay. Stay right here. It's okay, sweetie. What's the matter? All right, so let me see if she'll rest. So at any rate, this amount of barley seed is, so this is talking about how much seed it yields. Okay. So we can get a little bit of commentary here. So according to its seed, that is according to the capacity to be planted with a particular quantity of seed. So homer derived from hamor, donkey. A load that a donkey can carry is a large unit of dry measure well above 100 liters. Okay. So, verse 17. Oh, little girl, here. Oh, God, she's driving me crazy now. Here, stay on my lap, okay? No, you can't go there. Sweetheart, here. Come. Stay right there, okay? Okay. So אם משנת היובל יקדיש שדהו כערכך יקום. So if from the Jubilee year he shall dedicate his field, according to its value, that shall be, according to that, evaluation, according to its evaluation, it shall be established. Sweetie, you can't, sweetheart, what? What do you want, baby? Okay, there you go. There we go. Okay. Did we find a solution? Sit on my lap? Okay. So that's if you do it during the Jubilee year. So if you do it during the Jubilee year, then you take the volume, right? The amount of the field or the amount that of seed that it can produce. And for each homer of barley seed that it can produce, it's valued at 50 silver shekels. So, for instance, let's say this field can produce 100 homer of barley seed. 100 times 50 is 5,000. So it's valued at 5,000 shekels. And this is if you do it during the Jubilee year. So that's going to be, well, we'll see what that means. Okay. So if after the Jubilee year, he dedicates his field, kohen et HaKnesseth al pi hashanim הנותרות עד שנת היובל ונגרע מערכך. So, what this is saying in a nutshell is that it's, oh, sweetie. All right, babe. Okay. If it's prorated. So if you dedicate it during Jubilee year, easy, sweetie. If you dedicate it during the Jubilee year, then it's 50 shekels per homer of barley seed, because it's going to be dedicated until the next Jubilee year, okay? Until 50 years later. But let's say you dedicate it 25 years after the Jubilee year. Now it's only 25 years until the next Jubilee year, so it's going to be valued not at 50 shekels per homer of barley seed. It's going to be valued at half the amount, 25 shekels per homer of barley seed. And actually, it's a pretty easy calculation in this case, because it's 50 shekels per homer of barley seed, and it's 50 years until the next Jubilee year. So if there are 25 years remaining to the next Jubilee year, it'll be 25 shekels per silver shekels per homer of barley seed. If there are 10 years until the next Jubilee year, it'll be 10 shekels per homer of barley seed, and so on and so forth. Okay? Okay, so from the Jubilee year, it shall stand according to its value. So this accords with the preceding laws about the redemption of slaves and real property in relation to the Jubilee cycle. He's referring to what we learned in Leviticus chapter 25. That everything is prorated according to when the next is. If you sell your property, quote unquote sell, it's prorated based on how many years of crops the person who purchased it from you can get until the following Jubilee year. Jubilee year occurs every 50 years. Consecration at the time of the Jubilee would produce maximum value. Because the land is part of the person's ancestral tribe, holding it must revert to him at the next Jubilee. And we saw that explicitly in Leviticus chapter 25. Okay. All right. In verse 19. Verse 19, Va'im Ga'ol Yif'al et Hessadeh HaMakdish Oto. So if the person who has dedicated the field wishes to redeem it, buy it back from dedication, Yasaf HaMishit Kesef Erkecha Alau Qam Lo. So he, again, I'm going to paraphrase here. So he can buy it back by adding 1/5 of its value. So again, let's take an example. Let's say the field produces 100 homers of barley seed. So if there's 50 years until the Jubilee year, that would be a total of 100 times 50 shekels per homer. It's going to have its full value of 50 shekels per homer. And that's going to be 5,000. And now he decides a day later that he wants to purchase it back. He wants to take it out of having a status of being dedicated, of being sanctified and dedicated to Yahweh. So he can do so by adding 1/5 onto its value. So if its value is 5,000, 1/5 of 5,000 is 1,000. So now he can purchase it back with 6,000 shekels of silver. It's a bit different. First of all, this is consistent for what we saw up above. Okay, so if you dedicate your house and you want to buy it back out of its sanctified status, then you add 1/5. You want to redeem an unkosher animal, you add 1/5. And with human beings, there's no such idea because they're not dedicated in the first place. Just their value is given. So it's consistent. But not only that, it's consistent with Leviticus chapter 25. So let's look at Leviticus chapter 25 for a brief second. So Leviticus chapter 25 is, among other things, the laws of the Shabbat year, the Shemitah year, and the Jubilee year. And so you can redeem So here let's just read this quickly in the English. This is Leviticus chapter 25, verse 25. If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, the nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. If, however, there is no one to redeem it for them, but later on they prosper and acquire sufficient means to redeem it themselves, they are to determine the value for the years since they sold it and refund the balance to the one whom they sold it. They can then go back to their own property. But if they do not acquire the means to repay, what was sold will remain in the possession of the buyer until the year of Jubilee, it would be returned to the Jubilee, and they can then go back to their property, right? So if you want to redeem it, you can redeem it at its value based on how many years are prorated, based on how many years are left until the next Jubilee year. But you don't have to add an extra fifth. You have the right of redemption. In fact, the implication in Leviticus chapter 25 is that you're encouraged and you should redeem your ancestral property when you have the means to do so. And you can do so, you have the right to do so at any time, and you do not have to add any extra money to redeem it. You just return the difference based on how many years are left until the Jubilee year. But if you dedicate it to Yahweh, you also have the right of redemption, but it's a little bit different. Here, you have to add a fifth. Okay, you can't just take it, give it to, you can't be an Indian giver with Yahweh, and even though it's your land and you have the right of redemption at any time, because it's been dedicated, it's not been sold to another human being, but dedicated to Yahweh. So therefore, there's an extra added. I don't want to call it a penalty because I don't think the implication here is a penalty, but there is a, shall we say, premium that's added on in order to be able to reduce it from the status of holy to the status of just being regular. Again, it's kind of a premium. Okay. So let's say you, I don't know, you joined a very exclusive club at Mar-a-Lago, and you paid $100,000 per year. I don't know what it is, $100,000, let's say, to join Mar-a-Lago, and then a couple months later you decided you don't like Trump. I happen to love Trump, so oh well, I would stick in it if I were ever invited to join Mar-a-Lago. I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon. But you want to get out of it, so yeah, you can get out of it, but you have to pay back not $100,000 to get out of it, but 100. I don't know, that analogy doesn't exactly work, but we'll go with it anyway. But $120,000 to get out of your obligation to be part of Mar-a-Lago. Now you guys get the idea. Okay, verse 20. ואם לא יפעל את השדה, ואם מכר את השדה לאיש אחר, לא יגאל עוד. So if he does not redeem the field, his ancestral field, and he sells it to another person, then it can no longer be redeemed. Okay, so this is also a bit different. So let's talk about this. Okay, the Hebrew is a little cryptic. It is indeed. So Milgram, who was one of the leading experts on the book of Leviticus, plausibly argues that the person has first sold the field, which would ordinarily revert to him. And by the way, Milgram is not rabbinical. It's just a very excellent analyst of the book of Leviticus. Argues that the person has first sold the field, which would ordinarily revert to him in the Jubilee, and then consecrated it to the priests. The consecration following the sale, which was in effect no more than a lease, suggests that he's renouncing his right to have the property revert to him in the Jubilee, as the next verse makes explicit. So that makes a lot of sense, actually. Let me just read it again in the Hebrew. לא יגאל את השדה, ואם מכר את השדה לאיש אחר, לא יגאל עוד. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Verse 21, Wahaya, and then I'll translate and explain everything. Wahaya, השדה ושאתו ביובל, קודש ליהוה כשדה החרם, לכהן תהיה אחוזתו. So if he doesn't redeem it, so basically, if you dedicate it to Yahweh and you haven't redeemed it by the Jubilee year, then you lose it at the Jubilee year. It's different. It doesn't go back to you. It now becomes the property of Yahweh. And now we understand what this means, that it becomes property of Yahweh. So his ancestral property is transferred over to the possession of the Kohen, of the Kohanim, to the priests. Right, verse 21. Let's do an Everett Fox on that one. Start here. So, verse 19, if he wants to redeem, yes, redeem the field. The one hollowing it is to add a fifth part of the silver of your assessment of it, and its cost is to be established for him. But if he does not want to redeem the field, or if he has sold the land to another man, it cannot be redeemed again. The field shall be, when it goes free in the home bringing, that's how he's translating the Jubilee, a holy portion for Yahweh, like a field specially devoted. The priest it shall be, for the priest it shall be for his holding. It's a very interesting law, right? So if you dedicate it to Yahweh, that you, in a certain sense, lose it forever if you can't redeem it by the Jubilee year. Let me just parse this all in my head once again. Verse 20, ואם לא יפעל את השדה, או אם מכר את השדה לאיש אחר, לא יגאל עוד. והיה השדה בצאתו ביובל קודש ליהוה, כשדה החרם, לכהן תהיה אחוזתו. Okay. So that's if you have dedicated your land to Yahweh. I'm still not clear with the language regarding, but okay, I'll look at that on the side afterwards. Verse 22. ואם את שדה מקנתו אשר לא משדה אחוזתו יקדיש ליהוה. So now we're talking about, it's not your family inheritance. You purchased the land from someone else. So now this is the flip side of the coin. Maybe this will shed a bit more light on what we saw earlier. So now you're not the seller. You didn't dedicate it, or you didn't sell it to someone else. You've now purchased that land, someone else's land inheritance. So again, it's never a full-time purchase. It's a purchase only until the Jubilee year. So it's not really your land. It's someone else's land that you're leasing. You have a long-term lease until the Jubilee year. Verse 23. Let me just check in and see if there are any comments or questions. Right. And Hakham correctly says, and in Moses, oops. And in Moses here, yet again, we see that all the land inheritance was patrilineal, contrary to rabbinic halakha, that Israelite identity is matrilineal, for sure, 100%. Of course, the rabbis always like to point out the story of the daughters of Tzalafchad, and that also, and they like to point that out as being some kind of feminist doctrine that women can inherit land. We've spoken about this before. It's quite the opposite, because the women of that generation are just placeholders for the next generation of males. So it's actually an anti-feminist doctrine, but we won't get into that right now. We'll get to it eventually. Little girl, you cannot. No, you can't go up on the table. What do you want, sweetie? No. You can't walk on the keyboard. You are a little pain in the neck. Stay there, sweetie. Okay, I'll give you more food soon. Okay. So, right. So in verse 22, 23. וחישב לו הכהן את מכסת ערכך עד שנת היובל. So in this case, now the Kohen is going to determine the sweetie. Okay, sweetie, come. This cat is very, very active right now. It's nighttime, and cats get very active right around and after sunset. Come, sweetie, come, lie down on my lap. Okay, sweetheart, come. What, baby? You want to stay like that? Okay. So, so again, I'm going to paraphrase here. The Kohen is going to make an assessment of the value based on how many years there are until the Jubilee year. And on the day when it's valued, then it will become holy to Yahweh. And of course, since it's not his land inheritance to give away, verse 24, Bishnat Yovel Yashuv Asadeh Asher Kanahu Me'ito Lasher Lo Achuzat Haaretz. So in the Jubilee year, the field, the land will return Lasher Kanahu Me'ito to or from, this is to, but it really means from that who purchased it. Asher kanahu me'ito, to the purchaser of it. Asher lo achuzat haaretz, to the one whose land inheritance it is. In other words, it's not your land to give away permanently. So if you purchased it from someone else, then it goes back to the original landowner at the Jubilee year. Okay, so in the year of the Jubilee, the field will revert to the person from whom it was bought, to one whose land it was. Okay. Verse 25, V'kol erkecha yi'eh b'shekel hakodesh 20 gera yi'eh hashakel. So all of your evaluations will be according to the holy shekel. So now we're getting a standard weight and measure, or a standard value in this case. So the holy shekel is 20 gera, and gera is small weight. Okay, from gerar property like a gerar kernel. Round as if scraped. This is a small weight. BDB also 20th part of a shekel. Syrian giru, and so on and so forth. And it's evaluated a number of times. This holy shekel is mentioned a number of times. And so we see it here in Leviticus 27:25. Okay? So it's just giving us the exact value of the holy shekel. Does that imply that there were other values for the shekel? Maybe a non-holy shekel, just a everyday to day shekel, which had a different weight, possibly. We know, for instance, that the amma, how do you say it again? Amma in English. Can't remember to say it in English. I can't think of the word in English. It's from the point of your finger to the elbow, but I forgot the word in English. Cubit? Yes, cubit in English, right? So the cubit, there were two different forms, or there were two different values of the cubit. There was the short value of the cubit and the long value of the cubit. So the short value of the cubit was, I believe, was it 6 handbreadths? And the long value was 7 handbreadths. I'd have to look it up again, but that's the best of my recollection. So there are, and this is in the Tanakh. So there are different values for the same word. Maybe this is, again, maybe it's mentioned a number of times. Let me just look that up again, just to jog my memory. Short cubit versus long cubit in the Tanakh. And so again, just a very quick aside. So the Tanakh explicitly uses two different standard cubits: a short cubit, the common standard measure, and a long cubit, often called the royal or ancient measure. The core difference between them is exactly one handbreadth added to the forearm measure. So cubit, or an amma in Hebrew, is elbow to middle fingertip, and the long cubit is elbow to middle fingertip plus one handbreadth. So that's four. So that's 4 finger breadths, right? So like this, and you guys can see it, and so on and so forth. Right. So the short cubit is 6 handbreadths, and the long cubit is 7 handbreadths. Short cubit is 45 centimeters. Long cubit is 52.5 centimeters approximately. And just to give an example, the Tanakh directly mentions the shift or difference between these two measurements in 3 key places. And yeah, the most famous one is 2 Chronicles 3:3. The text notes that the foundation of the temple was laid out in cubits by the first measure, Hamidah Harishonah. This refers to the older, longer pre-exilic cubit, the 7 handbreadth cubit, rather than the shorter standard cubit used later in Jewish history. Anyway, that's for another time. But I just did want to point out that perhaps when it speaks here about the holy shekel being 20 gerah, 20 little pieces of silver, that maybe it's defining this measure, and maybe there are other shekels, maybe there are other shekel measures which were not the official shekel measure used by the Kohanim or regarding the sanctuary. Okay, let me check in and see if there are any other questions or comments. Alrighty. Okay, can we get through all of Leviticus? We can almost, we're lucky. It's almost 9 o'clock here. It is getting a bit late. Let's see if we can go a little bit more. So verse 26. By the way, I can close this out. Close this out. And in fact, Robert also says right here, the sanctuary shekel is elsewhere. This phrase indicates a shekel that has a greater weight than the mercantile shekel. Okay, verse 26. Bechor asher yivukar Yahweh Mehema lo yaktish ish oto im shor im se Yahwehu. So if it's a firstborn, bechor asher yivukar Yahweh, so a firstborn which is dedicated as firstborn to Yahweh among the animals, lo yaktish, he cannot dedicate it to, a person cannot dedicate it to God because it's already been dedicated, is the idea. Whether it's a bull, ox, or a sheep, it belongs already to Yahweh. So the Hebrew is a little bit it's very tertiary. Yahweh. So, but a firstborn animal which has already been dedicated as firstborn to Yahweh. We saw this already back in Exodus chapter 13, that the Peter Rechem, the literally that which opens the womb of every human being and every animal belongs to Yahweh, because Yahweh redeemed the firstborn from Egypt by killing the firstborn of the Egyptians. So it's a whole big thing with the firstborn. The firstborn is dedicated to Yahweh. If it's your firstborn son, then he's redeemed. That's Pidyon Ben, redeemed for 30 shekels. And if it's an animal, if it's a kosher animal, then it is dedicated to Yahweh. If it's a non-kosher animal, then it is redeemed. Because a non-kosher animal cannot be non-kosher, quote unquote. Again, the Torah never uses the words in that context of kosher or unkosher. Is the wording clean or unclean, but I'm just saying it that we know that as kosher or unkosher. Right? So it's already been dedicated as the firstborn to Yahweh, and therefore no person or a man cannot dedicate it, whether it's a from the herd or from the flock, cannot dedicate it to Yahweh. Let's get a fox on that one. However, firstborn that is assigned as firstborn to Yahweh, among animals no man may hallow it, whether ox or sheep, it is Yahweh's. Now, if it's a tamei animal, and we can expect already, we see a pattern here. The Torah is extremely logical. So if you are just redeeming a tamei animal, Exodus chapter 13, let's go just for a second to Exodus chapter 13. Oops. Just to get the context here. It's a bit bigger. So Exodus chapter 13, verse 11, after Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanites and gives it to you as he promised an oath to you and your ancestors, you are to give over to Yahweh the first offspring of every womb. All the firstborn males of your livestock belong to Yahweh. Redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey. But if you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. And we're going to get details of that when we get to the book of Numbers. In days to come, when your son asks you, what does this mean? What does what mean? The redeeming of the firstborn. Say to him, with a mighty hand, Yahweh brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, Yahweh killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. That is why I sacrificed to Yahweh the first male offspring of every womb and redeem each of my firstborn sons. And it will be like a sign on your hand and a symbol on your forehead that Yahweh brought us out of Egypt with his mighty hand. The rabbis completely illogically say that this is a reference to tefillin. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. The sign is the redemption of the firstborn. Okay, so here, if you've dedicated, so if you dedicate a non-kosher animal, so a kosher animal, okay, cannot be dedicated because it's already dedicated as the firstborn to Yahweh. You can't switch it out or do anything like that. Verse 27, however, Wa'im berhima hatme'ah ufada be'erkecha. So if it's an unkosher animal and you wish to redeem it, be'erkecha, so you wish to have it valued for redemption, or you wish to redeem it according to its value, to its valuation, yasaf chamishito alav, then you have to add another fifth upon it. So if you've dedicated an unkosher animal to Yahweh, you can redeem it. But in Exodus 13, we saw that you redeem an unkosher animal, and it's represented by the donkey here. Okay, you redeem it with a lamb. So it's a kind of a one-to-one exchange. But here, if you want to redeem it, and you've dedicated it to Yahweh, which you can do because it's not dedicated to Yahweh already because it's an unkosher firstborn animal, and then you want to redeem it. So again, the same pattern we saw before. You have to pay a premium to undedicated to Yahweh, and that's you add a fifth of its value to it. Ve'imlo yigael wa v'nimkar be'erkecha. And if it's not redeemed, then it is to be sold according to its valuation, its original valuation. Let's see if we have any commentary here. Nothing. Okay, but I think we get the idea. And what does that mean? It is to be sold according to its original valuation. So you cannot, once again, you cannot dedicate an unkosher animal to Yahweh. You sell it according to the value that the Kohen or that was given to it, and that's what you bring to. That's what's dedicated to Yahweh. That's what becomes the property of the Kohanim. So you're not bringing an unkosher animal to be dedicated to Yahweh. Only a kosher animal. Okay. Maybe we should stop here. Almost done. It's late. We're going to stop here. We'll finish off Leviticus chapter 27 next week, and we'll probably be able to start with Numbers. Yeah, this is a good place to stop. So let me just make a note for myself. And regarding the prophets, so we finished Haggai today. So, and we're working our way backwards in the minor prophets. So next is going to be Zephaniah. So we're going to be starting with Zephaniah next week. It's also a short book. These are all short books. It's what they call the minor prophets. Doesn't mean they're less important. It just means they're short. So we're going to start with Zephaniah, and we're going to start, and let me just make a note for myself. So 1 second here, please. Okay, so it's Zephaniah. And then Leviticus 27, 28. Leviticus 27, 28. Good. Let's see. 251. Okay. Once again, we're on 28. Okay, so we're going to stop here. I'll just make it real quick. You know, we're working on a lot of projects. We're trying to do a lot of things here. So please, if you haven't joined the WAC, please do so. There's the QR code. It's a very small amount that we ask monthly, and there are a lot of benefits. You'll get a lot more. You be part of a private WhatsApp group. You'll have a lot more access to the leadership of the World Alliance of Qara'im. Since we are very busy, we have limited time, so we do give priority to our members. I think it's only fair. And also, if you wish to donate money, and we have a number of ways to do that, including cryptocurrency, Zelle, debit, credit card, bank transfer, and so on and so forth. You can look at the description, the original description for this class, but I'll also put up QR code for donating by debit or credit card. So please do, if you haven't done so already. We really, really rely on and need your funding. We have a lot of projects. This is a very critical time in the history of the nation of Israel, and I truly believe, as I've said many times before, from the bottom of my heart, we have to get the word out about charism. it's super important because the nation has so many problems right now, and it cannot advance in the direction it needs to with the current status quo, with the current status of rabbinical Judaism versus secularism in the land of Israel and throughout the Jewish world. So please, please, please consider donating to us or joining the World Alliance of Qara'im. The links that are in the description. Okay, we're going to end it here. I thank you for joining me for this Shabbat study. Mizrat Yahweh, with the help of Yahweh. We'll see you again next week, where we'll finish off the book of Leviticus and start in the book of Numbers. Book of Leviticus is, in my opinion, the hardest book of the Torah, of the 5 books of Moses, and people don't like it in general. They don't like it in general because it's very technical, and it's also a bit disconnected from our current experience. A lot of it has to do with issues regarding the temple, and there is no temple that exists today. But I actually find Leviticus to be one of the most, I mean, they're all pretty fascinating. I don't want to say the most, but it's up there. It really is. When you see the logic of the system, like we saw here today, with the adding of the 5th when you're redeeming it from Yahweh, but not adding of the 5th when you're not, and it's all very consistent and logical. It's logical when it refers back to the laws regarding the land inheritance and the Jubilee year, and that we saw in Leviticus 25. It's logical, referring back even to Exodus 13, the original statement of redemption of the firstborn. It's a very logical system. I guess we would expect that from Yahweh. So, unlike a rabbinical friend of mine who told me a couple months ago, here where I live in the Golan Heights, he said, and I quote, he said, "I know that rabbinical Judaism is irrational, but the world is irrational, and so therefore the only thing that makes sense in an irrational world is an irrational religion, and that's why I stick to rabbinical Judaism." I kid you not. That's what this person told me, and the twisted logic. The twisted logic of such a statement is, I don't know, I think the psychologists, psychiatrists, and I don't know, maybe the historians one day will have to pick that one apart, because it's, to me, it's a bizarre statement. Okay, any rate, so thank you once again for joining us. We'll go out with music as we always do. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov, depending on where you are in the world, and we will see you again next week. Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov. What's the matter over there?
הדרך אל האושר רואה צופיים מכשולים רבים עת לחייך לשמוח גם לטבוע אך מה יפים יפים בחיים זה הזמן לסלוח לוותר לשכוח גם אם זה קשה שנינו יחד את הכל עוד נשנה לא צריך לברוח את האמת לברוח האמת לברוח, אני ואת לא נשנה את העולם הזה. את שתינו נוסע אני למעלה, מבקש תשובות לשאלה, אין מענה ואיש גם לא יודע האם בסוף הדרך ניפגש. זה הזמן לסלוח, לוותר, לשכוח, גם אם זה קשה שנינו יחד את הכל עוד נשנה. לא צריך לברוח, את האמת לברוח, אני ואת לא נשנה את העולם הזה. לא צריך לברוח, את האמת לברוח, אני ואת לא נשנה את העולם הזה. זה הזמן לסלוח, לוותר, לשכוח, גם אם זה קשה שנינו יחד את הכל עוד נשנה. לא צריך לברוח, את האמת לברוח, אני ואת לא נשנה.